General Manuel Oscar Rodriguez Ibáñez, also known as Maury, marched slowly across the tarmac, looking at the brigade of Marines and auxiliary units coldly. There had been an incident. The brigade was due to be deployed to the forward theater where EarthGov had decided to establish a firm border with another species' territory. It had started with a debate over a couple uninhabitable worlds whose only redeeming feature was location, so that they could be used for ship resupply, refueling, and repair in a remote area. The operation had been in planning for 6 years while Earth prepared. They had received intelligence reports about the enemy military capabilities, and they were enough to give even the most hardened veterans like Maury reason to pause. The brigade was going to be sent to one of the worlds, behind a legion of combat troops. The brigade consisted of a construction battalion unit, 3 combat battalion units, and a support battalion that would wind up staying on the constructed base and run day-to-day operations once the border had been firmly established. Maury paused in front of each combat unit, glaring at them, then moving on. Trouble from combat soldiers was the norm, which Maury knew from almost 40 years of service. But this time, the incident was not from a combat unit, well, probably not from a combat unit. He paused momentarily in front of the support unit. It was configured differently than normal, with the Administration and Information Specialist platoon in front. The vast majority of the platoon members were CHRNAT-GV, a species that seemed determined to name itself something unpronounceable to every other race. Humans generally just referred to them as space otters. Initially, there had been concerns that the term would be offensive, but the otters were so amenable that they actually complimented humans on quickly agreeing to an easy-to-pronounce designation. Humans really liked otters, which is one of the factors that caused the incident. There had been a drunken fight at a local establishment, apparently over natives harassing the otters after the owner had refused to serve them. The results were a handful of otters being injured, one seriously. However, Maury knew that the diminutive otters were less capable of violence and destruction than they were of flapping their furry little arms and flying, so they bore no responsibility for the current crisis. Then Maury walked and stood in front of the construction battalion. The guilty parties were undoubtedly here. He bellowed in a voice loud enough to be heard by the entire construction battalion. It has come to my attention that 2 days ago, soldiers from this brigade destroyed a cantina. I am aware that local patrons of the business were involved in an altercation with members of the brigade, and that the assault on brigade personnel was completely unprovoked. We are working with local militia, and the guilty parties will be held responsible. Maury paced in front of the battalion, then resumed. However, the actions of those guilty persons in no way excuses the destruction of La Cantina, especially not using Earth Force vehiculos. Now, I want to know who was driving the bulldozer that leveled La Cantina. I know it was a member of this unit, and I will hold every soldier responsible until I find out who it was. Turn yourself in or turn in the guilty person. This has been elevated to a diplomatic disaster, which must and will be handled immediately. The soldiers from the construction unit looked at each other from the corners of their eyes. Then, as a unit, every enlisted soldier from the heavy vehicle company took a step forward and raised his hand. Maury glared at the company in frustration. He knew what this was, mutiny disguised as civil disobedience. With over 200 soldiers confessing, they were all attempting to protect the guilty individual. Maury saw the heavy vehicle company commander, a fairly fresh lieutenant, staring at his soldiers in horror. Maury knew the soldiers wouldn't give up the culprit easily, but applying pressure to the lieutenant might yield results. He went over and stood directly in front of the lieutenant, his own boots less an inch from the lieutenant's. The young officer looked ready to faint. Although he stood over 15 centimeters taller than Maury, he was gangly and awkward, sometimes clumsy, and unfortunately baby-faced. Senior and mid-ranked enlisted mocked him regularly with comments like, "Does his mama know he's in Earth Force? She did sign the permission slip, right? Maybe he's here to earn scout badges. Tell the recruiters to wait until after they are potty trained before signing them up. Hey kid, want to borrow my ID so you can buy yourself a beer?" But the worst part was the chopping of his name, from Lieutenant Sapolsky to Skippy. He knew that complaining about the hazing would lower his status in his troops' eyes, but wasn't sure how it could get much lower. Maury barked at him. These are your people, your responsibility. You should know who did this. Poor Skippy was visibly shaking. The public dressing down was bad enough, but Maury had a reputation for being the hardest, toughest grizzly bear of a Marine alive. He had risen through the ranks not by political connections, but through field commissions and successful performance in impossible combat situations. Maury had even beaten a publicly televised court-martial that had elevated him to folk hero status. So since these men are under you, which one is responsible? Skippy replied, voice trembling. None of them, sir. Maury squinted at him. None of these boludos?
¿Qué posible?
Maybe none of them are responsible because you ordered someone to do it. How do I know that you didn't order one of them to do it? Skippy swallowed hard. Because I did it. Maury was taken aback. Asterisk, repite eso? Asterisk, he leaned forward and practically screamed in Skippy's ear.
Repite eso, otra vez.
Skippy flinched, straightened himself, then stared straight ahead as he shouted, I drove the vehicle and destroyed the building, sir. He was so terrified that he bit his lip to not cry, and was very visibly trembling. A low murmur went through the company. Then Maury noticed that personnel in the other construction companies were starting to raise their hands and take a step forward, until every enlisted man and several officers had their hands up. This situation was getting out of control fast. He walked over to the company of otters and addressed them. They were practically pacifists compared to human roughnecks, so maybe he could make progress with them. This situation needs to be addressed quickly, as we are scheduled to leave in 12 days. If any of you can provide information about the incident, we can reduce the amount of diplomatic friction that this has caused. Earth Command knows none of you were responsible. We just need to resolve this situation. The otters looked at each other, a few quietly chirping. Then one otter raised his paw and stepped forward. Maury looked at him. See? You know something? The otter bobbed its head slightly, then spoke timidly. I operated the vehicle, General. Maury was stunned. This was not happening. It was impossible that this furry little clerk could have ever thought to do this. He pointed down to the otter's feet.
Eres loco.
Your feet couldn't even reach the pedals to drive it. Then another otter raised his hand and replied, I operated the pedals since his feet can't reach, General. More otters started raising their hands, each one trying to claim a role in the incident. One said he operated the gear shift while another claimed to push buttons. They came up with more and more ridiculous claims, including a couple who claimed to have cleaned and fueled the vehicle so it could be used to destroy the bar. As the otters tried to claim responsibility, Marines in other battalions started raising their hands and taking a step forward. Maury groaned under his breath. Dios mío! He waved a hand, settling the otters down, then addressed the company. EarthGov did not want you to be integrated with a combat unit. It was thought that there would not be an appropriate place in a front-line organization. But I advocated for your people because I knew, if nothing else, you are smarter than these cabrons. Maury pointed at the ranks of human soldiers. But evidently we have rubbed off on you, and you are as estupidos as we are. Maury closed his eyes for a moment as the otters began to bob their heads excitedly. He returned to the center of the formation, then bellowed orders. This brigade is officially under lockdown. All combat personnel will begin preparations for deployment immediately. Support staff, you will ready all logistics for inspections and conduct inventories. Construction battalion, you will be working 12-hour shifts to rebuild La Cantina. You will rebuild every last bit of it, down to the furniture. Any Marine who does not have something useful to do to prepare for the deployment will be assigned to assist the construction crew.
Comprenden.
The Marines shouted back, deafeningly, Hoorah! The otters were momentarily startled, but then started shouting, Hoorah! Maury let out a pained sigh. Maybe this disaster could be salvaged after all. He barked out, Brigade.
Atención.
Dismissed. As the troops left, snippets of conversation could be heard.
Congratulations, Lieutenant Ski.
It looks like your balls finally dropped. Well, since you otters are as stupid as we are, looks like you guys are officially one of us now. You know, the general ordered us to completely rebuild the bar, but he didn't specify how we have to rebuild the bar. Oh yeah, I got some ideas. 12 days later, the brigade left, well prepared, on schedule, and with the bar completely rebuilt. The owner and local authorities were spitting mad. Half of all furniture, restrooms, and other customer amenities were designed to the Otter's small size. Not only that, but the brigade logo was on every surface. Tabletops, doors, chair seats, chair backs, walls inlaid into windows on podium tops and sides everywhere, inside and out of the bar. The one exception was a brightly lit sign outside, used to attract customers. In place of the owner's old logo showing food and drink was available, the sign was animated to show an otter driving a bulldozer. The owner and local authorities had attempted to lodge an official complaint, but Mori told them in a very aggressive tone, "We have helped you. Obviously you refused to serve Earth Force personnel because did not think you had adequate facilities for them. We have solved this problem for you. Now you will never need to refuse service to any member of Earth Force, regardless of species. You will also never have a problem with local peons because we have taught them. An assault on one is an assault on all. Do not ever give me reason to come back to repeat myself." Many light years away, a human was laughing so hard he was choking. He stumbled through the ship's corridors until coming to his destination. Not only did he activate the visitor alert, but he actually performed the hostile act of knocking. Purg opened the door in alarm. "Oxidize, what has happened? Is there an emergency?" The human desperately gasped for breath and clutched his ribs from laughing so hard. Purg grew alarmed for his safety. The human seemed to be suffocating due to a seizure. "Lie down. I will call the medical specialist to give you emergency care. Do you have any injuries? Have you been exposed to toxins?" Rusty sat on the floor of Purg's quarters, catching his breath, so he could tell Purg the funniest damn thing he had ever heard. Rusty had been a Terra Marine, and still had friends serving who passed along news and gossip. It seemed his former commanding officer, who was formidable to say the least, wasn't slowing down with age. If anything, he seemed to be picking up speed. When he had been promoted to top brass, instead of sitting behind a comfortable desk and going to swanky parties with politicians and contractors, he still commanded frontline units instead. It seemed some political opponents, who were jealous that their ass-kissing didn't get them promoted over him, had arranged a hatchet job court-martial. Of course, Rusty's old commanding officer came out of it unscathed, to go on to win other campaigns. The commanding officer had always been a character, but he was truly in rare form on the latest incident. It seemed that otters who were assigned to a Terra Marine unit, as amphibious special forces and underwater demolition experts due to swimming ability, had been ambushed by a pack of alien terrorists. The aliens had kidnapped the otters, then taken them to a local restaurant, where the owner agreed to hold them until terrorist demands were met. The CO ordered a raid on the restaurant, where commandos successfully rescued the otters. The CO ordered that the restaurant be completely destroyed, then rebuilt as a new Earth Force command center with facilities that would accommodate humans and otters. It seemed that the command center was also going to be the future site of the military construction and engine school, because the logo had already been picked, an otter driving a bulldozer.